Jesus gave this command to love the way he has loved us. In Romans chapter 5, verse 8, the Bible says, but God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. God didn't just say, I love you, I think you're kind of cute. He acted. He sent his own son as a sacrifice on the cross to redeem us back into relationship with him. He took action that cost him everything to prove his love toward us. That's why when we worship God, we worship in response to what he's already done for us, and the feelings follow. We fall in love with him. We're not just talking about doing nice things for others. This kind of love characterized by Jesus in his word actually takes it to a whole nother level. You see, love requires sacrificial action. Love will always require sacrificial action. With this new command, the Lord raises the bar to a new watermark. Back in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy chapter 6, the commandment was to love your neighbor as you love yourself. You love yourself, so love your neighbor. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. In the New Testament, in John 13:34, which we just read, the new measuring stick, the new standard, Jesus said, just as I have loved you, you must also love one another. That's a whole nother level. Not just as you love yourself, it's just as he has loved us, we're supposed to love one another. Let me ask you, it's not a trick question. How did he love us? He loved us selflessly. He loved us sacrificially. He loved us with reckless abandon. He loved us willingly and painfully, even to his own death. That's how he loved us. Liz Curtis Higgs, you may not be familiar with her, but I want you to know back in the day, she was one of the best-known DJs in America. I mean, she had a national radio program that was just one of the top. Here's the thing. Howard Stern did the morning show. Liz Curtis, she did the evening show. And Howard would say to Liz, you really need to tone down your show. Now, when Howard Stern is telling you to tone down, you know the girl was something else. You see, she'd been burned by so many men, she'd become a militant feminist, and I mean a militant feminist. She had a Christian girlfriend that kept working on her, inviting her to church. She said, and I'll go with you just this one time. And so Liz shows up to church, this militant feminist with a lot of anger issues, and the pastor reads from the book of Ephesians, and he says, wives, submit to your husbands. Not exactly the verse her friend was looking for him to read that day. And so Liz got uptight. No, she didn't get uptight. She got ticked off. But thank God she actually heard the rest of what the verse said. You see, the second part of the verse says, and husbands, you sacrifice yourself for your wives, just as Jesus Christ sacrificed himself for the church, and he died for her. Who is asked to give up their life? Come on, women. There you go. Liz heard that part. She turned to her friend kind of cynically. She says, you know what? I'll gladly give my life to any man who will die for me. And her friend said, well, there's a man that actually did. His name is Jesus Christ. He gave his life on the cross so you can know what love and life really means. Later on, she will put down her defenses and dedicate her life to Jesus Christ. Now she's a noted Christian author and speaker all over the land. That's what Jesus' kind of love does. Just as I have loved you, and he loved us to death literally. I mean, How could David, anybody, love like that? You have no idea who I live with, who I work with, and who my friends are. Here's the thing that separates the Christian faith. And when I say Christian, I mean those who are followers of Jesus Christ and His Word. The Christian faith from every other faith. We serve a God who looks at you and looks at me, and He sees intrinsic value in His creation. He looks at you regardless of what you've done, regardless of what you've done to other people, and He said, you have worth to me. And He said, I've already paid the price so that you can have a relationship with me. He sent His Son to take care of that. God sees us with intrinsic worth. No wonder He commands us to love so that we could see people the way He sees them. God's love is always demonstrated. It can never be earned, and it will never be deserved. But He gave it freely anyway. It's not just something He talks about. It's not just good theory or good theology. He demonstrated His love in the ultimate way. If God's love is always demonstrated, guys, our love needs to be demonstrated too. The truth about love is that God calls us to love each other in a way that will require sacrifice. Yes, we ought to love our spouses and our kids with a sacrificial kind of love. Women, even when we guys behave like hard-headed idiots, God says, love him. Guys, even if she complains about you, criticizes you, and the honey-do list never seems to come to an end, love her. Love and cherish your kids. Tickle them more. Bring down the harshness. That's the way to start. And it will take sacrificial action on our part, because sometimes you want to tell them, I brought you into this world, and there you go. Encourage them. Praise them. Love them. They will disappoint you. That much I could guarantee it. And you will disappoint somebody else. But God still says, love them with a sacrificial love anyway. You know why? Because when you do, that love sharpens you. It strengthens you. It changes you. It develops you. Whether friend, family, or foe. Now you understand when Jesus says, love your enemies. He says, love them. Serve them. Prefer them. Love one another. You know how you do that? Because you recognize they have intrinsic value towards God. Therefore, you express love to them. I want you to know love is a verb, and it must be a verb. It will require sacrificial action. But finally, perhaps most importantly today, love is expressed through serving. Love is expressed through serving. I've unfortunately been to too many funerals lately. Less than 2 weeks ago, I was at a funeral actually doing the eulogy for my nephew, who at the age of 20 years old passed away. It's a sad time, but it was a real incredible time to celebrate his life. He was a very special boy. He was a special needs child all of his life. And I want you to know it was true when they said about him that when he saw Jesus for the very first time, because he lived blind, when he got into heaven, he got sight, and the first face he saw was Jesus. That the first words he also heard was, well done, good and faithful servant. And it doesn't matter who you are. Deep down in your heart, you too want, desire, hope that when your time comes and you stand before the Lord, He will say, well done, good and faithful servant. The deepest thought I'm about to share with you today, you may need to write it down, is this. You know what a faithful servant is? Is one who was faithfully served. Let me repeat that. You didn't get it. A faithful servant is one who faithfully served. It's not any more complicated than that. Many of the greats in the Bible, the heroes that we talk about and we celebrate, you know what they describe themselves as? Faithful servants. Abraham, the father of the faith, called himself a servant. Moses, the deliverer, a servant. Jacob, the patriarch, a servant. Daniel served Nebuchadnezzar. Nehemiah served King Artaxerxes. Servants. You said, well, David, that's the Old Testament. What about the New Testament? Do you know that Paul called himself a bond servant? It's a servant out of love for life. Peter, a bond servant. Mary, the mother of Jesus, called herself a bond servant. James and Jude, the brothers of Jesus Christ, call themselves bond servants.